Welcome to Meristem Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Peter Rousonelos of Meristem Crop Performance joins us to discuss how we can influence yield during the early vegetative period of the crop. We take an in-depth dive into the products you should be looking at during the post-herbicide application period.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Meristem Seeds Cup of Joe. Today, we have a special guest besides Ben and Lynn. I'll let Ben introduce and start the process.
Yep, today we have Peter Rousonelos with us. He holds many hats at Meristem Crop Performance, but we kind of wanted to talk about a timely subject matter right now. The corn's getting real close to getting posted for herbicides, and one of the most exciting things, it's even on the banner behind us, one of the most exciting things that I have learned about in the past year and a half or 2 years is some of these foliar and PGR products that can catch a free ride in the sprayer while we're doing these posting trips. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about. Did I miss anything there, Peter?
No, I think that that introduces it quite well. Yeah, thanks for having me here. And I'm excited to talk about some of the opportunities I think that Meristem has to share with their growers, educate. A lot of this I consider to be education, and then do with it what you will. But we're gonna talk about some specific products that we think influence the opportunity that's out there now. And what we're after is, that crop needs to be fed all season, right? We put out fertility in the fall or in the spring, depending on the market. But if you think about the way that even humans, as we consume food, I always think about it, we don't consume all of our food in the morning, and then go all day long. If I do that, I'm probably crashing by about 1 or 2 o'clock, and things aren't going well, right?
Not an intermittent faster.
Not an intermittent faster. So I try to eat, 5-6 times a day. Just have to watch the amount of volume I take in anymore as I get older. But the idea is that crop has nutrient demands throughout the season, and we want to establish that crop as good as possible, which I think we've done, and then we want to best manage it in season for maximum yield opportunity. We don't want it to lack anything. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here this morning.
Cool.
As we get into it, something I always like to just remind people of is we see the crop as a kind of a 3-step system. We always want to focus on nutrient use efficiency. We always want to focus on getting those plants off to a good, healthy start, which we've done this year. A lot of people are familiar with the Revline Hopper Throttle franchise, that planter box treatment that has really done a good job of influencing emergence and establishment. But we can't stop there, right? Meristem has great genetics, right? You've got good hybrids out here that are capable of high yield, and we think about the highest yields. We hear about 600 some bushel corn, we hear about 200 some bushel beans. That's quite the delta, right, between where we're at today and what this crop can actually achieve. And so I think to narrow that gap, it comes down to this optimizing in-season genetic potential, providing essential nutrition, and you mentioned it, stress, biostimulants, things that manage stress. I look at stress as probably one of the number one yield robbers as we get in season. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to make a quick hit on what we've done to get this crop started. With the Revline Hopper Throttle corn, the Revline Hopper Throttle soybean that Meristem has put out into the field this year, that you guys have had a lot of growers work with. I'm hearing nothing but positive feedback, so that's exciting. Mm-hmm. We call it a starter and a finisher. And the reason those are green starter and red is finisher is in the beginning we're all optimistic. Crop gets off to a good start, it's green for go. What happens after that? Stress, right? So that red is to highlight the fact that now we're going to do nothing but manage stress the rest of the season, right? So the finisher, the cool thing about the components in Revline Hopper Throttle is that they stay with the crop season long, right? They colonize on the root system, so we'll see benefits if we have stresses later in the season, and the ability for that material, those microbes that colonize on that root system, to harness more water, to harvest more nutrients, and we'll see that benefit later in the season. Some quick hits just to show so everybody knows that if they put it out there this year that we're seeing great successes in the beginning is emergence is where it all begins. Everything we do after this is not worth as much if we didn't establish it right. It doesn't mean that we walk away from our crop if we don't get emergence on day one. No, that's not what we do. Mother Nature can help us at times, and we can get some good luck, and we should still manage to our best efforts what's out there. But what we start with is what we'll always have, mm-hmm. right? So final stand is a big deal. So here, this is a flag test that was done by a customer and that's their quote. The first day they had 11,000 on the untreated was 11,000 plants versus 26,000 on the treated on day one, represented by the yellow flags.
So what you're saying is that you count the ones that came up first, and there was that much difference.
That's correct. Yeah, after the ones that came up first, the yellow flags represent the ones that came up first, and that was 26,000 of the 36,000 that were planted. And the red flags, or the pink flags, I believe in this, represent the 11,000 that came up that were untreated.
Well, and then you convert that over to looking at the ears.
Yeah, so precision planting, they have their office right near Pontiac, Illinois. They've got a couple locations. They've got one in Iowa too, and they've got this board in there. And I took a picture of it a couple years ago, and it's the shelf that shows what happens if your corn is emerged evenly in the first 12 hours versus 24, 36, and so on. And that 24 hours shows a 10% potential yield reduction if they don't all emerge in that first 24 hours. So with the use of the planter box treatment, we're seeing a greater than 50% increase in emergence day one.
You know what the funny part about that is, and I was just listening to Jason Webster, who runs the Pontiac farm there. They put a video out this past week, and he often likes to trick guys and ask them, he says, which one of these shelves is the shelf that we lose the most yield on? And commonly people would choose, the bottom two shelves, but it's actually the second shelf because there's higher incidences of percentage of plants that come up on day two where they're losing more yield potential than the ones that are on the very bottom side of that shelf. So you're exactly correct. Getting the plants up in the most uniform possible manner is extremely important.
Absolutely, and Jason does a great job over there, and we're doing a lot more with them this year. So there's going to be a lot more research being done with them. He's not only now excited about the planter box and seeing that emergence, but we're actually some of the conversation we're going to have today around what we do in season. They're going to be doing the exact same thing, and we're doing some on top of this. Then we're going to show at the precision farm that we can influence yield positively through the next step that we're going to talk about here.
And we're magnifying those differences now as farmers go faster and faster, earlier and earlier. So now those critical differences, everybody wants to start early, and you're magnifying those stresses. So by managing those stresses and getting things even, it's even more critical now to use your products to get that uniform emergence. Ben puts a great base seed treatment on with everything we know, but there's other things that we can't put on the seed that Meristem offers, and that is a huge game changer.
Yep, there's only so much surface area and only so much time we have to work with, so.
Oh, and it's about precision placement. I think the treatment is precisely placed, right? It's on the seed, right where the seed needs it. That's been the major advantage as we've advanced in seed treatments. And we think about precisely placing, Dr. Fred Bilo, Dr. Sybil talk about this all the time, the precise placement of nutrients as we want to raise more yields. Because if we precisely place those nutrients, we're dealing with smaller root systems now, higher populations, because we're trying to drive yields up. But as we do that, we have to continually place our nutrients as close to that root system as possible, and I believe some of the technologies that are able to come out in these planter boxes are doing just that. It's complementing that seed treatment that you're putting on your seed to influence the availability of nutrients, influence the root development, and that's that in that zone then where that plant is, it has more available to it. So Dr. Fabilo, I love it when he says the plants can think. They know the environment they're in, they can sense it, right? So if they sense an environment of nutrient availability, that it's going to have an adequate amount of food to thrive on, then the plant is going to be set up for higher yield. If it senses that there's not necessarily enough food source there, it's going to back off and it's not going to set itself up for as much yield. So we want that plant to be fat and happy. We want a big buffet of food out there.
You're exactly right, Peter, because there's data to suggest as we push those populations, you are making a smaller stock, and your root system, like you said, is smaller. So you've got to feed that plant, and you've got to get the nutrients in that plant when you're pushing that population. But just to change your population and not do all the other things, you could be very disappointed.
Well, and I think that's a great segue, Joe, into something else. We've established this, right? So this is without a doubt the truth. What we're looking at here on the screen. If you talk to anybody that's experienced, working with the planter box, working with starter, even they'll see that physiology. It comes out of the ground. We get that good emergence. We get a bigger crop. It looks beautiful, and then sometimes it plays out that they don't see a yield gain from it. Well, that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, and I think some of that is because we're not managing that crop we're building this phenomenal crop that's got all this opportunity. But if we don't feed it like one and we don't manage it like one, then we can't maximize that opportunity. And so we've got off to a really good start. I believe in a lot of the Corn Belt we're off to a really good start. We've just seen some rain come across and feed us with some needed moisture early, and this crop's going to take off. And I think the number one thing we need to do now to manage it is make sure it doesn't lack for anything it needs as it starts to go into some pretty critical yield determining times. So with that kind of gets us into the post herbicide that Ben mentioned. A lot of that's going to be happening right now, right? Guys are getting the sprayers out. It's always Memorial Day weekend. That's Memorial Day weekends when all the post herbicide gets put on. I was in retail for quite a few years, and Memorial Day weekend was one of those that you just didn't know what was going to happen until about Saturday. Yep. You had no idea. So I do want to put a shout out to all the hardworking retailers and farmers that I know they'll be out there this weekend. There'll be guys out there running their holiday weekend getting this done. But I always feel like when the crop's put in the ground, and then as it pops out of the ground, it becomes a marathon. You're always, I used to tell my wife when she'd say, why is it, do you have to do that today? Do you ever hear that? You ever hear that, Lynn?
Never heard it.
Do you have to do that today? Well, the reason I have to do that today is because the crop doesn't care what day it is, right? The crop's growing with or without me. So it becomes this marathon, and what do we got to do, and when do we got to do it, and it's that way all the way through harvest.
The reverse is true too. If she asks you to do something, you have to do it that day.
That's right. Yeah, I mean that's so she should understand that, right?
Yeah, it should be understand. Yeah.
but yeah, growing up, at least being around me in this industry, and I'm sure we can all relate that they have to put up with quite a bit of changes in schedules. But post herbicide, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, we're trying to kill weeds. Right, we're managing weed pressures. We might be putting out a fungicide even for early onset of disease. Maybe we're managing for crown rot. Maybe we're managing for better stalk health. Soybeans, we're managing even for some early insects. Whatever the case is. So we're out there killing stuff, right? Which is kind of fun to do. We're out there killing stuff. Everybody likes to talk about doing that. Well, at the same time, we're asking that plant to do a lot of things. We're asking it to metabolize all that herbicide. We're asking it to metabolize that insecticide. Yes, it's traded to be able to withstand it, right? These BT traits have given us a lot of flexibility in chemistry, but that plant still has to consume it, metabolize it, and put it out through the roots. So that slows the plant's growth, and that is a stress that it causes it. So we're wanting to mitigate herbicide. We're wanting to mitigate environmental stresses. We got that nice rain, but what came with it?
Wind,
hail,
cold.
We're probably going to get into some heat. So that plant, is feeling a little stressed based on environmental conditions pretty much all the time. We know we can influence yield potential at key growth stages. There are certain stages within the crop we know we can influence yield. We want to build upon that, what we call the Revline hopper throttle acre, right, where we have established that good crop. Let's not push on the brakes. Let's keep charging forward. We want to create the largest plant factory to optimize sunlight capture and nutrient storage. Right now early, we want to get the canopy as fast as we can with corn and with beans before June 21st. June 21st is the longest day of the year, and as much sunlight as we can capture before that is sunlight that we gain and we get to use. I think Dr. Fred Bilo said it, a photon that hits the soil is a wasted one, right? So I can't take credit for that at all, but it is the truth. If sunlight that doesn't end up on that crop's leaf and doesn't become part of that photosynthetic process is wasted. So we want to get the canopy as quick as possible. We want to increase nutrient storage inside that plant as much as possible, so we have it for later during grain fill and crop fill. In soybeans, I like to focus on the fact that what we're trying to do early, I believe, is maximize trifoliate development. Because the more trifoliates we put on as fast as possible, which is why we try to plant early, right? But if in addition to planting early, if we can influence that plant to put on as many trifoliates as possible, then we set up more sites for flowering, which is more nodes, which is more pods. And so these are all things that we're thinking about now that are setting us up for success later. And if we put an illustration to it, this is where we are in the crop time, right? We're in that V. I drove from Wisconsin this morning down to here, and I'd say there's everything from just coming out of the ground to, V3. Talked to some guys down in southern Missouri today they're looking at V6 corn. Mm-hmm. So We're sitting about here in most of the area. Guys are out there post-herbicide, and what we're recommending is this Harvest Shield Complete and Revline Early Season during this time. In corn, to me, it's got a lot to do with we're setting an ear, right? We're setting potential. That starts around V5, V6. The other thing that's happening, and I kind of jokingly say it, so hopefully this is okay, but I say that the corn's going through puberty. It's a little confused. But that kernel's going off the power of the seed, right? That plant's going off the power of the seed. It's living off of that seminal root system, and now it's going to move to its primary root system, where it's going to start to take advantage of those nutrients that we've put out there in the form of other fertilizer sources. And when it does do that, it's also metabolizing herbicide. It's also taking on environmental stresses. So and it's getting ready to determine yield. So we're asking that plant to do a lot right now. And so anything we can do to mitigate those stresses and maximize that photosynthetic opportunity is going to help us set as much yield opportunity as possible in determining that ear. Soybeans, same product, Harvest Shield Complete, Revline Early Season. We'll get into the why on that, but why do I want that on soybeans now? We talked about it, right? Induce flowering as low as we can in the plant, induce flowering as soon as possible, but maximize trifoliate development so that herbicide doesn't slow it down and we keep pushing trifoliates. I've seen a whole trifoliate difference where we've just applied herbicide normally on soybeans versus with a product like this, where we see an actual additional trifoliate at the end of it's usually about a week. You can see, and that's quite a bit more flower opportunities and noting sites.
That by itself is 3 to 4 bushel. If you have that potential, I mean, you have the potential for another bushel.
So one thing real quick hits for guys that spray their own, we know we got great formulations in these products. That does matter. These products lower the pH of your solution, so they act like an acidifier. And I don't think we talk about that enough in a lot of these foliar nutritions. I believe hopefully one reason Meristem chose Meristem as a partner in this is that we have good quality products. You can get foliars in a lot of places, but there's a lot of foliars out there that negatively impact the pH of the solution. And when you raise the pH, what happens? You degrade your half-life of a lot of your tank mix partners, your herbicides, your fungicides, your insecticides, right? You reduce that. We want to complement the tank mix. So in a lot of these products, there is an acidifying agent that reduces the pH so that we get into the leaf cuticles faster. We don't interrupt the efficacy of the rest of the tank mix. And then a lot of these products do re-wet when they are applied to the leaf. So what does that mean? Well, you apply a lot of these to the leaf surface. If whatever doesn't get into that leaf surface quickly will dry. And so a lot of competitive products will dry and they'll turn flaky, and that part's lost, right? So our efficiency goes down on our applied nutrition. There's technology in these that actually it does re-wet almost to a gel. So when we get that dew or another event, the plant's able to take that in. So going to product, Harvest Shield Complete. This is one that we like a lot, and we like a lot because it hits a lot of buttons. What we're talking about mitigating stress. I like the rainbow of micronutrients early. So this has got a rainbow of micronutrients that's going to help drive photosynthesis, which is really important. That's how we're going to continue to grow that crop. Put on wider leaves, stockier or girthier stalks. You know, we're going to produce wider leaves in soybeans, corn, whatever the case may be. Those are our solar panels, right? That matters for utilizing solar energy and sunlight. And the other thing that happens is in here we have phenols and proline, and what those are going to prime that plant for stress. So does that mean you have to look outside and think, oh, it's going to rain in a few days, or it's going to be hot, or it's going to be cold? No, we're priming that plant, and that's going to last for 3 to 4 weeks within that crop. We know there's going to be stresses that are yield robbing probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks, so we don't have to try to time it perfectly. You know, I tell people jokingly, I'm a Cubs fan. I grew up a Cubs fan. We're in Iowa. I can say that I'm a Cubs fan, right? We got the Iowa Cubs. But I'm a Cubs fan. And at the end of every year, they used to say next year is going to be better. Or next year is going to be different.
Wait till next year.
Wait till next year. They were right. Wait till next year. Next year's going to be different. But it's probably not always going to be good. Right? We had one good greenhouse year as a Cubs fan. It was 2016. Yep, there's nothing we could have done different that year to maybe influence it in a better way. So we have those crop years sometimes, right? Where, gosh, everything just kind of goes right. And it seems like maybe some of the practices we do just didn't maybe quite pay what we thought they would. But probably 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. You know, there's always going to be stresses that rob yield. And Harvest Shield Complete, the way it's set up is it primes that plant so it can handle those stresses. and continues to produce sugars. When that plant undergoes stress, it ceases to produce sugar, so that factory stops. When that factory stops, then it's producing defense mechanisms, these different amino acids and things that provide the defense mechanisms to handle that stress. We're basically injecting that plant with those defense mechanisms so it doesn't have to produce them. So when it does undergo that stress, there isn't that dip in performance. I think about COVID, and I think about the fact that we had factories shut down to do what? They shut down to produce hand sanitizer. What happened to the supply chain?
It's messed up.
Took a while to refill it, right? So we can't ever get that time back. That time's gone. Doesn't mean they did the wrong thing by producing hand sanitizer. It was something that was needed. But the fact of the matter is, you can't get that time back from producing the product that they would typically produce. So if the plant is producing something other than sugars, we can't ever get that time back, because those sugars it's producing are a big part of our end result, right? Those sugars end up in the grain or in the pod to produce more yield. What we're showing here is, what's really neat about this test is the control. We can see what the control is. That's a perfect environment. That gray line represents that plant under perfect conditions. The red line represents stress. In this case, they put it under heat and drought stress. You can see the dip in chlorophyll in the plant. You can see the dip in obviously H2O content and total growth in all cases. Where Harvest Shield Complete was added, in this case it was a research project, so it was called Foliar Prime with a number. But Harvest Shield Complete, where it was added in those same environments, where that same heat and drought stress was added, the chlorophyll was as good or actually a little better than the control. The H2O content was right at the control, and our total growth was just real close to the control. So basically we were able to, that plant didn't realize, I guess I'll say, that it was under that kind of stress.
So when you guys have, and I don't think there's a slide on there, but if you roll back to the previous slide, yep, between the phenols and the proline, that's completely separate. By itself, under the right conditions, those can provide yield enhancement.
Absolutely,
correct?
That's correct.
So there's been data from the originator that suggests those two products just by themselves can increase yield or reduce stress.
Correct.
And then you have the whole other half of that equation, which is your nitrogens, your sulfurs, your iron, manganese, boron. There's a whole array in the rainbow. So it's a little bit small, and I don't know how it's going to show up for the viewer or the person that's listening. But you essentially have two different things that are pulling it together that potentially could give you a positive impact or a negative impact on yield, but a negative impact on stress.
That's correct.
So you're reducing stress in two different ways, whether that be from a slightly lacking nutrient or a stress factor, an abiotic stress factor.
You're 100% correct. One thing that we've learned over the years in this business is 1 + 1 in a lot of these cases does equal 3. Remember back when we were applying fungicide to soybeans and we stuck an insecticide with it, it seemed like even in the absence of insect pressure, 1 + 1 = 3. That's one of the oldest ones that I can remember. In this case, to your point, we know we need those rainbow micronutrients early because we want to maximize photosynthesis. That plant's, again, living off the power of the seed. We want to maximize photosynthesis so that we're getting that plant growth that we desire. And a lot of times, and the sulfurs, the boron, the manganese, the molybdenum, the zincs, those are all a big part of that. And so what we found though is when you pair those micronutrients with a biostimulant, with products that reduce stress and influence growth, that is a 1 + 1 = 3. If you're going to influence that plant to grow, feeding it with some necessary micronutrients at a time is a positive. So whenever we build these products now, we try to build in the nutrients that are also wanting to be used at that time in conjunction with those stress mitigation and biostimulant products.
Peter, and also your micronutrient package is different than some companies in the fact that it's focused on absorption, not just being a micronutrient that can be put on the label, but a product that will get into those leaf structures and get into that plant to help that plant. And so there is differences between your zinc, for example, and somebody else's zinc.
100%, Joe, and that goes back to kind of some of that stuff earlier where we talked about the formulation differences, the acidifiers, having the right form of the nutrient. Some like to say, hey, I've got an EDTA chelated form of nutrient. No, in the soil, that's great because it doesn't tie up to other nutrients or tie up and become unavailable. As a foliar, not so great, right? The plant doesn't take in the EDTAs as easily as it takes in more of a sulfate-based type of micronutrient, and then within the formulation chemistry of the product, there's components in there to help drive it into that leaf tissue and make sure it gets where it needs to go. So we've got the right micronutrients, the right form of micronutrients, paired with the right formulation technology to get into the plant, and then again in conjunction with the proline and phenolic acids to prime that plant for stress. We feel like this is a real winner. And we used to have, where this was born from, is we used to have two products for this case. We used to have a product called Homestretch. That was the micronutrient blend that you see on the screen. And then we had a product called Harvest Shield. That was stress mitigation products like you mentioned, Ben, that, hey, used by itself, worked great. Well, we married them together and made one jug. We did it for two reasons. We wanted it on every acre. We thought there's no reason to never put both of those on the acre. And secondly, we want to make it easier for the grower or producer to use.
And then this entire package is riding along with either the fungicide or herbicide that you're putting on right now.
That's correct. Yeah. So this can ride right along with that herbicide.
Not a separate trip or anything. It's just another thing you're adding into the system.
That's correct. And the thing that's most exciting, we're in the business of selling products, right? So we like to sell a lot of stuff. And what's really what I like about this is we've got real good data in soybeans that shows that, at a quart per acre, it pays at a quart per acre to put out that quart. You can see here in the data, it's, 1 pint early was a 4.6 bushel average response across these different sites. 1 quart was 6.2. So, let's just call it a $10 market. For that extra pint, that does drive a nice ROI for the producer. So on the soybeans, I do like to see a quart early. If somebody wants to run that pint early though, we're still seeing a positive impact. So, but the reason I mention that is that we're in the business of sell stuff is look at the corn. The corn is a quart at 4.2, at a pint it's 3.9. So as an individual that's paid to sell stuff, I'm going to tell you that in this case, most cases, guys run a pint and we're okay with it. We tell them that's what pays. This is still about driving ROI for the farmer and getting them the right product that's going to put money in their pocket. And in this case, our recommendation is to run a pint on post corn right along with that. And that's a very cost-effective application. On soybeans, we like to see that quart, but we have a lot of market that runs a pint with post herbicide, no matter what they're doing, and we're still very, very confident in having that response and getting that ROI. The other thing, if possible, we like to pair with it, back to the point of when you give food and reduce stress, what can we do to influence growth? Revline Early Season is a two-way plant growth regulator. It's cytokinin and endobutyric acid. There's other products out there. You'll see people come up to you and say, hey, you should use this PGR. Lynn, it's like a cup of coffee. Well, do you always want a cup of coffee? Not always. But it's to me, it's about what are you influencing that plant to do, right? So there's things we want to influence that plant to do early, and there's things we want to influence that plant to do later. We don't want a broad catch-all. In this case, the reason we call it Revline Early Season is because we want to put it on in earlier stages of vegetative growth, because it's going to influence root growth, it's going to influence vegetative growth, and what I like most about it in soybeans is it actually keeps it actually keeps the nodes stacked closer together. So we don't have high soybeans, and I think you guys are probably more the experts than I am as to why we don't want tall rank soybeans versus short soybeans.
They don't pay much for stems and leaves. They pay for pods and soybeans inside the pods. So yeah, you're exactly right. I've always told folks the tallest soybean usually never wins the plot. In fact, I've never seen the tallest soybean at harvest time win the plot. It looks the most impressive, but doesn't win the plot.
They'll have to go out there and take pictures and selfies standing in the soybeans, right, with them up to their neck. It looks kind of cool, but in the end, it's all about how many pods you stacking on that plant. And with Revline Early Season, we're going to influence that. We're going to influence keeping those nodes stacked closer together, and continue to produce more trifoliates. And on corn, we're just continuing to create that broad plant structure, if you will. That's what this is going to do. And in Revline Early Season, another value that it gets that it doesn't get a lot of credit for sometimes is it pushes that herbicide through that plant much quicker. So we're getting it through that plant much quicker. And I used to get the question, well, if I put Revline Early Season PGR out when I'm spraying, isn't it going to also make the weed kind of tough? or it's going to make it feel like Superman. Like, well, you're right. The difference is the plant, the corn or the soybean, it isn't going to get killed by the herbicide. It's just pushing it out faster. So the weed that will get killed by the herbicide, to me, that's like a direct injection. That's like giving it a shot of the juice instead of waiting. So there are times we don't make these claims around it, but I would tell you in my history around this type of product in a herbicide application, I've seen influence where we've done a better job and had a quicker kill. And I think it all comes down to just getting into that plant faster. So when we, something like I said, we're after when we put these Harvest Shield Complete and Revline Early Season together in an application, we talked about mitigating stress. We talked about influencing plant physiology to build up that plant as big as possible. This is the kind of stuff we're seeing, right? We're pairing these products together. We're leveraging that technology and that time that we're already going across that field. We're leveraging our time too. Like you mentioned, Joe, we're going out there. It's a free pass. So what can we do with a few extra bucks to create this type of image? When you look at the screen, we've got the leaf on the left. That's a treated plant. The leaf on the right, that's an untreated plant. And those came off the same spot on the corn plant at the same V stages. Much wider. That wider leaf is going to take in more sunlight. Right, that wider leaf is going to store more nutrients. Same thing as we work our way down. Girthier stalk versus the untreated stalk. More roots versus the untreated. And then most importantly, as we look there, I've got it flipped in the picture because the way I'm holding it, but the left side, that's an untreated corn cob, and then the right side, that's a treated. So we've set more kernels. Right, this was later after the fact, of course, where we went back to that same spot. We can see that we influenced that kernel set opportunity, but it doesn't stop there, right? So if we influence that kernel set, if we establish that good crop, and here we're influencing that crop to maximize yield opportunity, we've got to continue again to manage that throughout the rest of the season, so we can keep the kernels that we created and fill those kernels we created, and we'll get into that in another session. But one thing I like to talk about on this image is this field did not lack for sulfur. It didn't. So they actually use a high amount of sulfur on this field. This particular field's near Springfield. They get a product from ADM that's got a high amount of sulfur in it that they get, and they apply out there in the field. So if you look kind of in the background, you can see the picture was taken from the same tree line area. The left side was after a decent rain. What happened? We sealed off that soil, and we weren't getting that oxygen, and we weren't getting that nutrient movement to the roots. And we weren't getting that root establishment, and so that plant was starting to look like it lacked nitrogen. That was what the grower wanted to show. Go put more N on. And in this case, we just said let's take a look at these two products when you put them out there post. I think we can turn that crop around. And this was about 10 days later, where we saw that influence. We saw that plant. We just needed to kick it back into gear. It was under stress, and it was going to take on more stress with herbicide. And obviously it was already taking on environmental stress, and so we were able to solve for that and get that plant up and going again and get it to canopy. So again, this is same message, different picture. Build that plant factory, maximize nutrient storage and sunlight capture. The leaf on the bottom is the same leaf as the top, just a lot wider, bigger solar panel, hold more groceries. If you look at the stalk there, that stalk integrity, Joe, you mentioned it. Higher populations have got us where we're going in yield. They're directly correlated, but also what's directly correlated is smaller stalks. The plant can blow over easier. It doesn't have as big of a superhighway for nutrients to move up and down the plant, and so we want to build out that highway as much as possible. We also want to keep it free from disease, right? What happens if disease starts to set into that, and we get crown rot, we start to get some of these other diseases start to establish. That slows that highway down and doesn't allow that nutrient translocation to happen as much in water and everything else. So we want to keep that thing as healthy as possible. We can do some of that with fungicides, but nutrients are a big part of it. When you have adequate nutrition in a plant, you also have a healthy plant that doesn't get diseases easily. And so that's the other reason I get so passionate around why we should foliar feed at key times and utilize these biostimulants and PGRs at key times, because we're also keeping that plant healthier. If we keep that plant healthier, we don't have disease problems. The soybeans, sometimes they're I think somebody said the other day, we're trying to turn peasant peas into prairie pearls. That's what we're trying to do here, right? And build that plant factory. It's the same thing. Establishment of soybeans is important. There is more data coming out now that proving that as we establish soybeans more evenly, that's leading to higher yields. We're doing the opposite with soybeans though sometimes, right? We're coming back on populations, and so we've got to get the most out of that soybean plant, get it to branch and as much as possible, build as many trifoliates as possible, so that we can maximize nutrient storage and trifoliate development. So again, here, more trifoliates equals more nodes, which equals more pods. And in this case, this is a picture actually of the difference before being sprayed. This is the planter box treatment before being applied, and we can see right to the line where we've actually got a more established plant than where it was not treated with the planter box. So we're seeing that value of using that starter-like system on our soybeans to get them up and going and make sure we have adequate nutrition. Now we're going to spray them and continue to build upon this. And University of Illinois, we were talking about, we name dropped Dr. Sybil and Bilo here earlier. This is one of Dr. Sybil's slides. I took a picture of it and stole the use of it, but I think we think about a lot of times, how can I influence soybean yield? It's like the mystery. We know how we can do corn. We know we're looking at rows around. We're looking at kernels, or we know that. With soybeans, there's this mystery. How do I influence soybean yield positively? Well, here's the algorithm, right? Pod number per acre times seeds per pod times weight per seed. So this is what we're trying to directly impact. And the way we impact it is we put on as many trifoliates as possible to set as many pods as possible. And we can see here the thing I thought was really interesting too coming out of the university is it only takes one additional pod to get 2 more bushels per acre.
Per plant.
Per plant. One additional pod.
Yeah, and if you study the guys that are raising the 200 bushel soybean yields, their seed size is way larger. Seed weight, seed size, same thing. Way larger than the average farmers.
Absolutely. Yep, going back to that, Joe, we're exactly what you're saying, right? So we want to influence the amount of pods. And the way we influence pods is right now. We're getting ready to go out and spray post-herbicide. Let's get as many trifoliates. Let's get as many nodes as possible so we can set as many pods as possible. And then to your point, later, when we're talking about reproductive processes, we have to do all we can to influence that weight per seed and get that seed size as big as possible. Right now, what I think we can take advantage of is just trying to pick up, if we can just pick up an additional pod or two, the ROI on this application is huge. This is just a visual again about where we're at in the crop, Revline early season paired with Harvest Shield Complete, and then just kind of a dramatic display of Revline early season. We don't go out and recommend 8 ounces per acre. Our recommendation is 2 ounces because it's going to influence that plant to do what it needs to do. But I think this really highlights the Revline early season application and how it stacks those nodes, right? And you can see that plant shorter on the far right side, but it's loaded with branching and trifoliate and nodal development. And then you go all the way to the left side and you see none, and you can still see that significant difference just at 2 ounces. And this is without Harvest Shield Complete, right? The Harvest Shield Complete will build upon this as well. And that synergy of that 1 + 1 equals 3 between those two products.
I think I'm going to try some 8 ounce.
We may have done that by mistake. That's what happened. So where this came from was a little bit of an oops that would turn into an interesting project. So, hey, I wouldn't blame you to go out and do a few strips. So with that kind of summarizes the what we're trying to do post and why we're trying to do it. And so if we're off of that topic, I'd like to talk a little bit about side dress nitrogen.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to hit on before we get to the side dress nitrogen time frame is go from a full retail, no discounts style of what is the return on investment for each product individually. So how many bushels does it take on the high side? How many bushels does it take to pay for the Harvest Shield and the Revline early season?
So to pay for the Harvest Shield and Revline early season in corn, that combination, if we're running a pint of Harvest Shield Complete and 2 ounces of Revline early season, that combination is gonna require in corn it won't be more than 2 bushel, and then soybeans less than a bushel today. So if you figure that at about a $7 or $8 application combination between the two, and I'm actually on the high side there, that puts you at just under 2 bushel on corn at $4, and that puts you at just under a bushel at $10 beans. So again, I believe we're influencing it to, it's hard to predict yield at V5 or at early V stages on soybeans, because what you're doing is you're setting it up for success. We need a little help from Mother Nature as we continue through the process, and we need to do the next steps to really maximize it. But definitely I've seen anywhere from 3, 4 to 8 to 12
Right.
at this application.
And I am a key proponent of the whole program. If you go back to the middle set of slides, I'm a key proponent, and you don't need to go back, but I'm a key proponent of managing this entire system. So
It is a systems approach.
yep, we have some of the prettiest crops out there right now. We have had one of the nicest springs for getting, and I feel bad for our friends in the south that don't have anything put in south of 70, but we have a phenomenal crop, and now it's time to put the money into it to take care of it.
Absolutely. Yep. Manage it for success. And instead of being proactive or being reactive, being proactive has been the best. You know, anecdotally, I've told this story in other cases, but you know, I've been in this space 100% of the time for now about 12 years. And when I say this space, I mean in the crop additive space, right, where we're doing things to try to influence yield and increase efficiency. Some of these things we can do some cost offsets. We can get into that in another session, but in general, we're trying to maximize yield potential. And I have producers that I've worked with that always leave a field or a part of a field or whatever the case is, and they don't just leave off one product. You know, we're always out looking for that silver bullet. To your point, Ben, there is no silver bullet. The silver bullet is the program, right? So, and that's in everything we've ever done. There's no silver bullet in raising the best, fattest cow that I'm aware of, right? You have to take care of it from beginning to end. There's no silver bullet in that with humans. We can't just not care and then there's some magic bullet towards the later part of our life to keep us from falling apart, right? I mean, everything living we have to take care of from start to finish, and our crop is no different. And so, I have growers that have set aside parts of their operations to always test the system, and the end result varies, but it's always positive. And it's never about this one product made me 3 bushel, or this one product made me 8 bushel, or this one product didn't work. It's always about the system made 10 bushel this year. And then some years it's 40 or 50 in corn. Some years it's 20. Some years in beans it's 8 or 10, and some years it's 20. I will tell you, it's never, in those about 12 years that we've done that, it's never been not a return. Can I tell you which component it is? No, it's going to be probably different every year, but the system is consistent. So as we get into nitrogen, I think, you know, we got a lot of corn out here. We mentioned this V, you know, coming out of the ground to V5, V6, a lot of side dress nitrogen going out. I think we're going to see even an uptick maybe in some side dress nitrogen from some of these recent rainfalls. Guys that might be get concerned and they want to just add a little bit more. It's hard when you can't look, you know, we can look at our crop and we know, hey, well, I got to address that. That's emotional. Sometimes out of sight, out of mind. Right below the soil profile, we don't see where our nitrogen is. We don't see, you know, certain things. As if we put out a stabilizer on our fall or spring, we can't see that it may or may not be working or doing its job anymore. Right, between time and weather, you know, it's probably filled it's ran its course. Mm-hmm. And so as we look at managing side dress, or going out there with side dress, I'm a big fan of side dress, whether it be Y drop or whether you're side dressing, whatever form of nitrogen you're using, I still believe in managing it for success. And so real quick nitrogen lesson, the plant wants two forms, right? NH4 or NO3 negative, the nitrate. Those are the two forms that the plant can take up. Our nitrogen management products increase the quantity of NH4. Right, that ammonium nitrogen to help maintain that ammonium in the upper inch of the soil profile, and when we do that, we get more plant uptake in the form that the plant wants. So this isn't about stabilizing N. This isn't about killing off or getting rid of soil biology to influence maintaining ammonium nitrogen, because I don't want to do that either. Right? Everything we talked about up to this point, we're using soil biology to help us harvest more nutrients, to create bigger root systems, create bigger plants. So I don't want to hurt that process, but I do want to manage my nitrogen for placement, right? So if I put that, we talked about the buffet earlier, I want a big fat happy plant. If I'm sitting here and I've got, you know, and there's food, if you happen to have food out here, right, I would probably eat more of it than if the food was out in the other room, because that means I have to go get up and go get it. But if the food's sitting in front of me, I'm probably taking a few extra bites. You know, that's probably happening. I kind of told this story around beer to some guys a while back, and they agreed with me that if we were sitting around the table, instead of having to get up and go to the bar, if I just had the case in front of them, they probably would have drank more. So that analogy worked really well in this scenario. But anytime we can put the food source closer, again, that precise placement of nutrition closer to that plant, it's gonna access it and take up more of it. And so with that being the case, we have a couple products in that environment, Maintain Elite and N-Gear Dual Action. The one that we most recommend this time of year was Side Dress UAN, Top Dress Urea. A lot of farmers though that have their own application equipment, most of it's probably UAN, right? The Maintain Elite we can use for anhydrous ammonia. So if you do have your own anhydrous bar and you do have your own injection system, Maintain Elite is a great way to manage that anhydrous. Other than that, if you're using UAN, N-Gear Dual Action's our go-to this time of year because a lot of it's being put on usually with a Coulter or a Y-drop. And so what we've got is the below ground component that manages that nitrogen for loss and places it is also in N-Gear. So N-Gear is an NBPT, which is a molecule that's been around forever, right? It is a stabilizer. It keeps it from volatilizing, basically. There's a lot of products in the market that have NBPT in it. And we can name off probably 5 or 6 of them right here. So that we know that works. That manages it for volatility. And then when it is incorporated in the soil, whether through rainfall or a mechanical event, the below ground portion of N-Gear is very similar to the below ground portion of Maintain Elite that manages that nitrogen for loss. And here's a kind of a crude drawing. I'm pretty proud of this drawing. I'm not an artistic guy. I was on a plane traveling probably about a year or so ago, and I thought, what? And I didn't have internet access. I think I was on one of these flights where the internet didn't work. And those are always real convenient. So it got my artistic juices flowing, and I thought, what could I do with this time? And I always have this conversation about this, and I don't have a way to illustrate it. So here it is. Whether you're most of our nitrogen that's going out side dress is untreated because most of the time the farmer thinks the plant's going to use the nitrogen fast at this time. I'm placing it when it needs it, and that's all true. The right time and right placement is part of that, but also making sure that it can get to it is critical as well. And so on the left side of the screen is ammonia molecule as it kind of plays plinko in the soil profile. That's what that's going to do when you apply that untreated nitrogen. And even if you treat it with the most competitive products, it's not going to do anything for placement. Again, it's going to try to do something else within the soil profile that tries to keep it in ammonium form longer, but not anything with placement. On the right side is the power of the polymer. So that's where we're creating a synthetic exchange site to help attach that nitrogen molecule to keep it near that plant, that root zone. And what we find is that we get a lot more nitrogen in the upper 3, 6, and 9 inches of the root zone. And this is a study we did last year out in Indiana. If you can see the dates, I'm not sure if they'll be able to see it real good, but you can see it was done in September. So towards the end of the season, right? So this was spring applied ammonia that a lot of guys don't treat their spring applied. I'm a big advocate for treating it. I'm a big advocate for treating every time we go out with nitrogen because this is what we're trying to accomplish. If you look at Maintain, the top 3 results are 3, 6, and 12 inches. The nitrate that was pulled is double digit, except for one, 9, 10, and 14 parts per million versus the competitor, which is 3, 5, 2, 3, 3, 2. That's, in this case, it was Centuro and N-Serve. And what that shows is that we obviously established more of that nitrogen higher in the upper inch of the soil profile like the previous picture showed. And so therefore, when it did convert to nitrate, we had more of it left over. Did this result in a yield gain? It did. We did just recently get the results back. But I would say in some cases, if it didn't result in a yield gain, it was because it didn't lack for N. Right? Maybe we put on too much. This is a way that we can be more efficient with our nitrogen applications. And if you look at the right side, the ammonium form is basically the same as the competitor. So we're able to keep more nitrogen there and get it into that plant. And again, that's N-Gear Dual Action. It's a 20% NBPT with a below ground polymer that captures it. And that polymer I kind of illustrate through a demonstration. It's kind of fun that inside this container here is a dry form of the polymer that goes into the product. And again, kind of like a cooking show, I'm going to pretend like I put it in the oven and take it out of the oven now. But basically, if I were to pour water in this, in about 30 seconds, we'd end up with this. And what this is this is the polymer, right? So again, as I talk about the ice cream test, you go in, they flip the ice cream cone upside down, and that means it's good. Or I think you get it for free if they don't flip the ice cream cone upside down. I've never asked for the free one. They have forgot to do it before. I just felt bad, asking for a free ice cream cone. But the whole idea is that we got this polymer, and that polymer, that's what that nitrogen is fixing to, much like a soil colloid. Right? It's an opposite charge of that nitrogen. It helps fix it to that polymer, which maintains it in the upper reach of the soil profile, like what we saw on those results. Now, in case you're thinking, well, if it's fixed to that polymer, that means my plant can't access it. That's not the case. If it's fixed to the polymer, the plant can access this. It can take up the nitrogen, and it actually can take up part of the polymer. So the polymer is not harmful at all to the crop, and it's actually not harmful to the soil at all. When this polymer breaks down over time, and it will break down, as it breaks down over the course of time, it actually helps feed biological sources. So we see increased soil biology where we actually, later in the season, as we measure that, where we use the product. So the other thing that we see is more nutrients in general up into the plant, because when we put all that nitrogen in that upper into the soil profile, roots go to it, and we actually unlock more nutrition and get more nutrients into the plant.
You said before we were filming that obviously you're not going to be putting that with water. You're going to be putting it with 32, so you're not going to get the same solution in the tank. Correct.
Yeah. Sometimes this demonstration can backfire. A guy says, "Well, I don't want that happening in my spray tank, or I don't want that happening in my bar." This is a very exaggerated example that shows how the polymer works in the soil, but you will not have this in your applicator. When it gets into the soil and gets into soil moisture, this reaction starts to happen. But we exaggerate it quite a bit in this the way that we show it. So yes, just pictures. I like pictures. I think they say 1,000 words. Untreated. This is your typical. This was 30 gallons of sidedress UAN. This was actually in northern Illinois. A couple years ago, and you can see on that side, it looks good. It's a good, healthy crop. This was around September, it's around Labor Day. That's just typically when you can start to see it, right? You start to get that maturity, you start to get that firing in places, and this was starting to fire at the base of the plant. Still good looking crop, and if you really get down low and you look up, that's where you start to see the sunlight difference, where sunlight's hitting the ground versus leaves. And then if you look at the right side, that's the same 30-gallon treatment, but treated with the N-Gear dual action. You can see the difference in the stay green. You can see reduction in sunlight hitting the ground. So again, we're not wasting any of those photons. We're using them for photosynthesis. And you pair managing your nitrogen effectively with also a good foliar program that we just talked about to build up that plant factory. To me, that's the game changer, right? That's when you got that good, healthy plant out there that doesn't lack for anything. On the far right side, that's some satellite imagery. That's just plant health imagery that reflects back. And that is the green are two different trials where the farmer did pre-plant, actually, nitrogen, utilizing this technology, and then pre-plant nitrogen not using the technology. And you can see the difference where the yellow and red is applied without it, where the green is applied with it. And as you can imagine, the yield map usually correlates with these satellite imagery maps. The other thing too I want to just call out, because I think this is something we don't talk about enough, even within our own group. Sometimes we forget. We always think about managing nitrogen, we think about stabilizers, and we think, that only works if it rains. What if we don't rain? I wasted my money. Or what if, whatever the case is, we're close enough to the plant using it, we're probably not at risk for loss as much. Again, we're trying to place it. It's not about loss. It's about making sure that plant can access it and use it. In this application, this is actually really dry, terribly dry. So this was a trial a farmer did that went out with UAN, used N-Gear dual action. They did it on 40 acres on a 240-acre farm. Beautiful farm. Great soil types. High yield typically. They're upset if they're not getting 230, 240. It's a failure for them. This was a failure year. They raised about 180 where they treated it and about 150 where they didn't. So both of those in their minds, yeah, they didn't like the yields, but this was an aha moment as to why we manage nitrogen, because yes, we manage it typically for loss, but when we're really dry, the plant can't access the nitrogen either. There's no soil solution to move it, right? So if going back to that Plinko picture where we've got nitrogen placed throughout the soil profile, if we don't have any soil solution, the plant can't access it. Because we kept the nitrogen closer to the roots, the plant was able to access it even in a very dry environment, which is a very real opportunity after sidedress. The picture on the left that is the treated. So that's a more mature corn. It's obviously darker in yellow color. It's even got a better green color to the plant. And then the middle picture is the untreated, whiter cob, not as far along. It's just not as mature as the treated because it didn't take in the nitrogen. And then the top line of ears versus the bottom line of ears is treated versus untreated. And you can see much more tip back and a lot less kernel were maintained in there. So that resulted in this case, close to a 30 bushel difference. And then I want to just one last call out is, and I think we're going to do this in another Cup of Joe later on, is we'll be leading into, after we get done with this stage of the crop, we'll obviously be thinking about the next stage. And that next stage is going to be reproductive, and we've got some things to talk about when that time comes to finish strong, to make sure we keep those kernels, keep those flowers, fill those pods, fill that grain. But one thing I want to make sure to call out here is we've got a lot of wheat acres, especially in the southern part of the market. We've got a lot of wheat acres, and those wheat acres are coming into this fungicide time. I talked to somebody on the way here about fungicide on wheat, and it's what made me think of it, is something to think about as you're entering into that fungicide time. Revline late season is a plant growth regulator. We talked about Revline early. That's a plant growth regulator for the processes we want that plant to undergo early. Vegetative growth, root growth. Revline late season is a three-way combination to enhance the processes that we want to have happen then. Sunlight capture, sunlight utilizing photosynthesis, driving photosynthesis, mitigating stress. So we don't want that ethylene produced by that crop, because when it does that, it starts to pull back and it doesn't produce as much grain. It aborts grain so that it makes sure that it can finish out. And then we want NKBS in there because that is a combination of nitrogen, potassium, boron, sulfur, and molybdenum that are going to help mobilize sugars from source to sink. Take it out of that vegetative tissue, move it to that grain. So in the wheat market right now, we want to produce as much grain as we can on that wheat and that head as it's heading out. And the combination of Revline late season and NKBS with that fungicide app will result in a healthier crop and will result in more yield.
So with both of those products, I think the Revline late season is like a 12.8 ounce per acre use rate. That still qualifies for the same for wheat.
That's correct.
And then NKBS, you're somewhere between a pint and a quart.
That's correct. You're typically between a pint and a quart. I like to run a quart when at all possible. If I had to pull it back on the grass crops, I'd be fine with a pint. If we had to pull it back for economic reasons, the Revline late season is a no-brainer. The Revline late season needs to be in on the grass crops at 12.8 ounces, so wheat, corn, the NKBS, somewhere between a pint and a quart. On soybeans, the NKBS, I like to see at a quart because we're really driving that potassium late in soybeans. And the Revline late season, we still maintain that 12.8 ounces. And I know we'll get into some of that later on another podcast. But for wheat, for the guys running wheat right now, consider this combination on the wheat acre. And again, I think this is just an illustration of why potassium, boron are significant demand in the plant. Obviously, nitrogen and other nutrients are at high demand as well, but potassium is at the highest demand over any nutrient, and so that's part of the reason for that combination is to really help get potassium into that plant and drive sugar mobility to the grain.
Covered a lot.
Yeah. Covered a lot of information.
So it'd be a good one to go back and watch a couple of different times, but timing is now. So we got good availability. We have stuff sitting on the floor for both the Harvest Shield Complete and the Revline early season. So if guys need to make decisions and make decisions quickly, we got trucks available. We can get stuff moved around and guys can see, test, go whole hog on the farm, try it out, see how convincing Peter was. And but I'm excited about it because, we were talking even beforehand, So just manganese alone, like a manganese foliar, can change the shade of your crop 5 different shades darker, just that by itself. So during the timing of this filming, my dad is probably posting my corn using both of these products, and I'm really excited because I got before pictures. We're going to see some after pictures to see that dark, lush green canopy and take a crop that I think has an excellent top-end yield potential and push it even further because, like I said, things went in the ground nice, and we got to protect the yield now.
Continue to build upon it. I mean, I always use the analogy that, hey, if you're gonna, I had a son that, that football, right? What are they doing? They're all, what do they call that when they're beefing up? They're taking in all the calories. I can't remember what they call it. Bulking. They're going through bulking season, right? They're bulking and they're working out and they're eating calories. Well, that's what we have right now. We have this plant that's bulking, right? We're trying to create that superstar athlete, and the last thing we want to do is pull it off of the rations, right? Is take it off that diet, because if we've got this great looking crop out there that we've established well, we want to continue to feed that crop throughout the season to maximize opportunity. That'll pay us the bushels in the end, and I'm very confident that through the system we're going to give farmers back a good ROI.
Oh, perfect. Joe, do you got a corny joke to get us out of here?
Yeah, I do. Last week I was telling you, I still got it, with the cashiers have been checking me out. I just wanted to add on to that. For my age, I've got a lot going on for me too. My eyes are going, my knees are going, and my back is going. So anyhow, I thought I'd throw that in there. This one here, my dad told me years ago, and I thought, you got to be a farmer to understand this, okay? So what's the difference between a mechanic and a doctor? What's the difference between a mechanic and a doctor? A mechanic washes his hands before he goes to the bathroom. Okay? Think about that a little bit. And then my last one is a little bit of geography, okay? If someone from Cuba marries someone from Iceland and they have a child, is that child an ice cube?
I don't know if you're going to get away with that. Political environment.
Well, I just want you to think about that. Okay. Anyhow, thanks for watching today. Thanks, Peter, for coming in. We sincerely appreciate your business. Though for those of you that are still struggling to plant, we're going to send you as much dry weather as we possibly can. And we sincerely thank you for your business. We'll see you next week.